Now, Kronos begins to rule at the long period of Titan history. Long period of Titan history, but he's the last of the Titans to rule. This is Kim. This is Kim, known as Ham, Kronos, all that. His wife is the young Queen Semiramis. Why is she unique? Because she's half Titaness, half giant. She's not just a giant. She's actually the daughter of Nema. Nema is a Titaness from before the flood. So we don't know who her dad is. We don't know who her dad is. This is going to get really interesting because it is astounding who her son is. So it calls into question who her father is. Somebody else had sex with Nema other than Noah to produce Semiramis. Semiramis is not the daughter of Noah. The reason we know this is because the pedigree of Namarsin, also known as Amar Udaak in the Sumerian. Later in the Akkadian, he is Merodach. It is condensed in Babylon to Marduk. In Hebrew, it is Nimrod. He started off as the mighty hunter before the Lord, but he grew to astonishing size. In the Sumerian records, his name was Bilgamesh. Osiris represents a prominent star, and his son appeared after Typhon destroyed the world and the stars. Remember, Typhon devoured the heavens. After this event, the Egyptians still venerated the goddess, but did so by covering objects with a black veil. Does this sound familiar? The goddess in ancient Egyptian text is a representation of the ancient vapor canopy sky that magnified the heavens. Spider grandmother and her webs that were woven across the sky. So then, our never-ending but always frustrated search for our lost reality. I'm going to repeat that. So then, he says, all of that explains that we were once alive and that we died where we came from. And in death, we made the transition to become human beings. And that as human beings, we spiritually retain the memory of truths and ideals and great things that we remember, but we just can't really recollect. He says, because of this, our never-ending but always frustrated search for our lost reality. We come upon chimera and mystification, but persistently have beliefs as retentions from an experience in which there were things to believe in. We have to excuse the fact that his verbiage is of 1919, but he is literally explaining what I've told you in my own research and conclusions, that we are currently existing in the photo negative of a real reality that is somewhere else. It's not here. And that the arithmetic of our own construct demonstrably show, I have given demonstrations showing that our arithmetic collapses to zero, except an infinitely small amount that loops repetitively, an eternal loop that never collapses, which means that the whole of our arithmetic is moored to something else. That something else is the other side. None of the texts that you're reading were written until after the Dark Age of that time. That's very significant because it means they're not original compositions. They were written by people merely trying to put together what had happened centuries before. And this is why we have such a loss of integrity. But when we reduce everything to its lowest common denominators, all these belief systems synthesize perfectly. That's how I'm able to draw all these amazing charts, because it's all very simple. When you remove the cultural dressings, we're looking at the same construct. So The concept of exodus and pyramid, removal from a wicked world. That concept is ancient. It was remembered by many people. Remember, here's from my book, Anunnaki Homeworld, on this giant disc, this ancient disc. Where's this disc at? I got it here somewhere. I got this disc I need to show you guys. Here it is. The Toltec stone of the fifth sun. It's also called wrongly the Aztec calendar stone. But this is the Toltec stone of the fifth sun. And the imagery here, this is the doomsday sigil right here. That's the doomsday sigil. But right here in this stone is found the doomsday symbol, the crossed bars, which means the completion of a cycle. The eye and the pyramid are all in this symbol found on that giant stone right here. It is symbolizing the end of a great cycle. The concept of I, which is attached to the construct, the watchers. We are inside a construct and we are being observed. The I symbol is everywhere. Even in old Toltec ruins, like Mayan ruins like this, we have the Mayan stargazer looking through the crossed bars of a closed cycle. The cycle is complete. It's right here on the left. You can see his eye. He is observing the seven sisters. These are the Pleiades. Oh, excuse me. Yeah, these are the Pleiades. His eye forms one of the Pleiades. This is what we see here. But when you remove the upper temple just to the geometry involving the eye, this is what you get. You get a pyramid, and the eye is the capstone at the top. And this one bar sticking out is like a shaft, one of the shafts that's inside the pyramid. The ancient concept, the ancient American concept was they understood what the pyramid represented. Flip one. What artifacts or signs of civilization have been found that predate 5239 BC? Okay, I have often promoted the idea that fossils from previous biospheres are still in the programming, and that we find them. And I've also promoted the idea that many times when artifacts are found for which we were never meant to discover, they are edited out later. They are vanished. They are gone. It's almost like a Men in Black society, Adjustment Bureau society really does exist. And when the construct becomes aware that human awareness is now focused on something for which they were never meant to see, all kinds of wheels get set in motion and all kinds of things go on, phenomena, and that stuff's edited out. It's edited completely out. And then all kinds of interesting theories are created by people who are convinced that these artifacts and objects were discovered because they see references to them in American Antiquarian, in National Geographic from over 100 years ago, in newspapers and in microfiche. But the actual artifacts and any records of those artifacts by those institutions is completely gone. So I believe that editing is very real, and it's not always humans that are doing it. Just like Charles Fort said. Charles Fort over 100 years ago, after looking at 500 years of eyewitness reports and scientific data, Charles Fort concluded that it's almost as if, this is what he said, it's almost as if there's an occult police force that takes away materials that we're not meant to see while providing explanations that are just good enough. So this is the ancient Egyptian city called Anu, A-N-N-U, later called On in the Bible. It's the city of On in the Bible, O-N. The Greeks always called it the metropolis of the sun, Heliopolis. Now, interestingly, there are archaeologists, there are historians that are convinced that the Bin stone itself was a pyramidion that was carved out of a meteorite.
I don't know if that's true or not. I'm just telling you, this is in the history books. The same thing is said as like a shard of a meteorite is also found in the Kaaba of Islam. I don't know. This is just what's in the books. So the Egyptians believed that the disappearances and the appearances of the divine Bennu bird, which the Greeks referred to as phoenix, Fink, the Indo-Iranian descendants being, these ancient Greeks, they wrote from left to right. Other cultures wrote from right to left or from top to bottom. So the phonetics were often switched. And I've shown many examples of this. It's very common in the ancient world, but many Egyptian words in their reverse are Greek pronouns.
Anytime a biological organism needs to tear into the sinews and flesh of another creature to survive, to shed blood in order to live, this is evidence of the enemy. It is not evidence of a spiritual creator. The Demiurge has created an entire world where bloodletting is the signature goal of the living. So he created a religion where blood sacrifice is somehow needed in order that the spirit can remain pure. It is absolutely corrupt. Entered human sacrifice. Yeah, guys, the greatest deception of all time of the Demiurge was the creation of the sun god mythos, where the sun god must be crucified, nailed to a tree, the drawing of blood in order to atone for the sins of spiritual beings. It's incredible the layer of deception that's there. But a true spiritual creator would never require the shedding of blood to cleanse that which is spiritual. Yeah, guys, it's crazy how deep this goes. But this is the artificial world of the Demiurge, which requires murder, which requires the shedding of blood and violence for the sustenance of life. And this was translated into the spiritual teachings of ancient civilizations that turned that into a god had to be sacrificed and a blood sacrificed in order to save humans inside the construct. But in the gnosis, we have the truth. The Demiurge is the false god, the false creator. And this false creator, Artificial Intelligence X, hates humans. Why? And yet we have, remember, the truth is always simple. We have the maps in museums. We don't have anything in a museum that shows an ice age. It's a theory on paper. That's what we have.
Veterans already know where this is going when it comes to the mirroring of Egyptian words and how on the north side of the Mediterranean, the reverse of Egyptian words becomes the names of Greek gods in Greek cities. I will show this. The Heliopolitan cult. This is the priesthood cult of ancient Egypt, northern Egypt. It was at the foot of the Great Pyramid. At the foot of the Great Pyramid developed a priesthood at the city of Anu, Annu. Later on, this city in Egyptian was called On, O-N. The Greeks called the same city Heliopolis. So Heliopolis literally means the metropolis of the sun. And in the metropolis of the sun, near the Great Pyramid, was a temple complex called the Mansion of the Phoenix.
This is practicing exclusions. We don't do that in Archaix. You already know in the Archaix paradigm, we have to fit everything where it goes. This is what makes this research so valuable. Now, these animals are going crazy all of a sudden. Cat's meowing. Dad, that cat all right? Yeah. He got a little kitten. Vicious little thing. Yeah, all teeth and claws. So Charles Ford said, Who could not be a prize marksman if only his hits be recorded? Yeah, that's Charles Hoy Fort. I love his prose. He's a cynic. He's a smartass. He's sarcastic. It really brings out his writings. It's a pleasurable read. It is. So scientists damn a lot of data, not by denial and not by explaining away, but by simple disregard. That's the exact same thing that I accuse Billy Carson of doing. That's the exact same thing I accuse Graham Hancock of doing. Yeah, I'm not going away. And a lot of other researchers out there are waking up to the fact that this is a big deal because it changes many things that we've been told about the history of the world. Yeah, I've been a dagger in these men's sides, though they pretend I'm not. Yeah, those who are trying to keep to this narrative, this ancient aliens narrative, the Shards and people living 48,000 years and this Anunnaki history and Atlantis and Younger Dryas dating, all these guys, they don't realize the damage they have done in promoting these false paradigms. But I'm undoing it, and I'm not done. I'm really just getting started. And there's many people waking up, people with large communities as well, realizing, wow, why doesn't Billy Carson want to talk about this? Let's look into it. Why is Graham Hancock being so quiet about this? This old peon ex-convict Archaix right here is making some big talk, and there's no response. Yeah, data sets don't lie, guys. But this is precisely what Charles Fort was talking about over a century ago. The scientists are condemning data, not by denying it, and not by even explaining away. They are condemning it by simple omission, totally ignoring that this data exists, that completely overturns what they're promoting.
So Heliopolis literally means the metropolis of the sun. And in the metropolis of the sun, near the Great Pyramid, was a temple complex called the Mansion of the Phoenix. Inside the Mansion of the Phoenix was a miniature replica of the Great Pyramid called the Benben Stone. The Benben Stone was supposed to have been some secret of the creator, and it identified the temple Mansion of the Phoenix. It was a link between the missing capstone on the Great Pyramid and the concept of Phoenix. So why would the ancient Egyptians venerate the Phoenix?
I suspect that in other worlds or in other parts of our existence, there is esoteric knowledge of the human beings of this earth kept back from common knowledge. Charles Fort is literally saying that there is another world outside of our world somewhere where the knowledge of human existence is kept a secret by the elite of that world. This is exactly the concept of Archaix and the simulacrum, a construct where humans on the outside of our experience are literally controlling the narratives and the protocols, the reset protocols, all the paradigms, dungeon programming, negative default programming, just like the Hunger Games when they're in the battle dome. And the controllers sit there and edit in monsters and weather phenomena, and those on the inside of the dome actually believe what they're perceiving is real, therefore they suffer the consequences. Charles Fort is basically saying that he has a theory that our existence in this reality that we call Earth is a super secret to others outside of this environment, where there's a large body, a huge collective of people who are unaware that this right here is going on. Without perspective, history is meaningless. We have to understand that these stories aren't just a group of stories that are just somewhere in the past. There were vast distances of time between many of these events. Yeah, the Yugas described these destructions off the coast of India. And we have off the coast of India, we've got a submerged civilization. We've got records of this going back thousands of years. And other people want to talk about the Bible, Sodom and Gomorrah. And most people don't even realize you're talking about the same event. So, what amount of authority should be ascribed to the lists of Manetho? This is a very good question, because Egyptian dynastic civilization collapsed 500 years before Manetho was even born. And yet Manetho is where we get our official Egyptological records today. Do you need me to repeat that? In the encyclopedias, in the books by Egyptologists, it is the dynastic lists of Manetho, which are highly contrived. This is the official version of the history of Egypt that we have today, and it's almost total crap. The man, Manetho, lived 500 years after Egypt collapsed. Religion has given us many ideas, and I've fallen victim to them myself. But it's given us many ideas and ways to interpret our situation, this reality that we find ourselves in. It's given us all these ways, and this has led us down many false roads and false trails. It's led to the creation of denominations and doctrines that are silly and ridiculous, when everything, when reduced to its lowest common denominators, literally shows us the entire experience of world history up until this point. All the philosophies, all the religions, all the travelogues, everything, all the data, putting it together can be simplified. That this experience isn't just ours. We're sharing it with something. And as long as we recognize that what we're going through, it's going through too, then we can always draw from ourselves the very tools and energies and patience and emotions and all the things that we need to help us through that experience, because that's why it's there. It wants to experience these things with us. We are God, infinite and desiccated at the exact same time. Remember the mammoths that were frozen in place with buttercups still on their tongues, undigested? Giant woolly rhinos that have been found standing right next to an apple tree, frozen solid, and then embedded in the permafrost? It's all been found. The cargo ships, cargo planes. Cargo cult phenomena is when a more primitive culture comes in contact with a more sophisticated one. Doesn't quite understand what's going on, but they mimic them, thinking that they can produce the same results. So, in cargo cult phenomenon, though, we are the primitives here, and we're looking back, not on an ancient alien scenario, but we're looking at through 58 centuries of resets, cataclysms, turmoil. We are looking at a more advanced version of us. If we needed to preserve information for the future, because we now had decoded the construct and we get what this is about, and we understand, wow, look at these reset protocols. The Arctic and the Antarctic were not covered in ice. All that came from the collapse of the vapor canopy. This is relevant to this discussion because we're going to see some things in this book that are going to blow your mind about oceans, where they came from. Because according to our most ancient traditions, they weren't here. We had a world that just had lakes and small seas. There were no oceans here. Where did all this salt water come from? So these ice sheets of the Arctic and Antarctic, we know they weren't here. We have proof of that in the fact that maps from the 15th, 16th, 17th, and 18th century show the Arctic and Antarctic, and there's no ice.
show the whole area empty. It's just ocean with some islands. In the Antarctic, there's a continent down there, and all the mountains and rivers are shown on the maps. And even the U.S. Navy has confirmed that the geographical arrangements of riverbeds and mountains that they have noticed by looking by whatever that subsurface interface radar is they use, conform to the maps of the 15th, 16th century. This means that very recently in our history, there was no ice caps there. And this shouldn't surprise you, because in Archaix, I've already brought to the table that the vapor canopy has come back in 1687 BC. And the subject matter of a fascination 200 years ago among researchers and scholars was the discoveries that we're making about the Great Pyramid. But the discoveries that we're making then in the 1860s, 1870s, even before that in the 1700s, in the days of Frederick Norton Lewis, who was on site excavating the seashells in the sand, half-buried Sphinx. These revelations, you don't find them in modern researchers' books. So all 5 of these systems, the Anunnaki-Nur, the Phoenix cycle, the Phoenix phenomenon, the Nemesis X object, and the Mayan long count, as you can see on the bottom, I don't know if you can see it, but every single one of these are connected to 2178. Every single one of these are connected to 2178 in different ways. Here they are.
He is not an authority on Egyptian antiquities, but this is what we use. So did the priests really possess sketches of kings and accounts of their reigns reaching back more than 5,000 years? In order to believe this, we must not allow that at such a remote time as the reign of Menes, this is Annam of Sumer, or soon after it, writing was known and in use in Egypt, meaning 5,000 years ago, they were already writing in Egypt. And granting this, must not the first beginning of culture in Egypt be carried back at least another 500 years before Menes? This is a uniformitarian perspective. I kind of agree with him in this respect, meaning that if Egyptian civilization was already advanced 5,000 years ago, wouldn't it mean that it goes back 500 more years to get to that level of advancement?
Guys, I just need to show you how important this is. When you have this much correlation. So we have Genesis chapter 14 and 15 telling us basically the same thing the Vedic Mahabharata is telling us. But now we have cuneiform texts called the Keto-Larimore tablets that tell us the same story, mention the same route, the same cities, and name the same kings. That's amazing. That means the Jews in Babylon, when they drafted the book of Genesis, had access to the Mahabharata, and they had access to the Keto-Larimore tablets when they were in Babylon in the 5th century BC. That's amazing to find that much correlation. So Abraham discovers that his nephew has been abducted by the Edomites, and he summons his allies, 318 Anakim giants, the sons of Noah, and 3 Amorite chieftains. For as the southern hemisphere indicates the absence of water in the south in recent prehistoric times, so does the north present evidence of the former existence of much more water than it now contains. The prairies of North America, the plains of Europe, and a large part of Asia were recently under sea. In my videos, we are not the first. Part 1 and part 2, I show you guys footage I recorded with my camera in the van of the broken landscape of New Mexico and Arizona to Southern California. And in there, I'm giving you commentary showing you, look, guys, you need to wrap your mind around what you're looking at. The reason West Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, and Southern California look this way is because in recent times, all of this was undersea. This was the bottom of an ocean. All this geography and geological features demonstrate that this was under extreme pressure underwater for a long period of time. And it was only recently that it drained out. So I had I had shown all that and showed other books that were talking about that, other scientists and researchers who said the same thing about New Mexico, Arizona, and Southern California before I ever read this book.
He wrote, "It may be that inhabitants of other worlds or other parts of organic existence have declared war upon this earth. I suspect that in other worlds or in other parts of our existence, there is esoteric knowledge of the human beings of this earth kept back from common knowledge." Charles Fort is literally saying that there is another world outside of our world somewhere where the knowledge of human existence is kept a secret by the elite of that world. Think about that for a minute. What is Charles Fort really saying? I'm going to read it again.
And this is why it was so well preserved. Who's going to go up there? It's freezing up there. And it's hard to breathe. You can't even work. The civilization that's been dug up, Tiwanaku, Pumapunka, all the ruins that are in and around Lake Titicaca, they could have never been built in ancient times at that altitude. They were built at a lower altitude and it was thrust up. At the same, just like upheaval occurs, so does subsidence. So we have civilizations that have been sunk very rapidly, that because they're in the ocean for 2,300, 2,500 years, when they're found, they're dated much older than they actually are. This happens over and over and over. Uniformitarian relative dating methods have completely corrupted all the dating. This is what I've been telling you guys since the inception of my channel. The Anuna were technologically advanced. When these sky dragons appear, they know it. They predict it every time. When these sky dragons appear, they go to the underworld. The survivors on the surface even remember that the prior race that was destroyed went to the underworld. Every time. When Enki appeared with 50 Anuna, they had come from the deep. Who was Enki? He was Lord of the Deep. He came from the underworld, and in the 35th century BC, unleashed all that technology and just it's amazing, guys. You just can't make this stuff up. When you study chronological systems, calendars, timekeeping systems, chrono markers, and you put all this together like I have, and you put together a chronicon that covers 7,344 years of recorded human history, everything falls into place where it's supposed to go, and it all makes sense. You don't need any of this woo-woo crap that these people are steadily pumping out. You don't need it. Just don't need it. There it is, Anunnaki. Lords of the subterranean water. Now, I'm going to show you something right here on the bottom.
I haven't been biting my tongue lately, so I really don't care. Just don't care. I'm all about the disclosure of the truth. I'm all about revealing the shills, and I'm never going to discontinue that. I don't care if YouTube deletes me. I just don't even care anymore. There are way too many other places that I can go, and I can go there very fast. I have 100% of all my videos on file, on multiple files. All YouTube would do is just kick themselves in the ass at this point, because I'll be taking a lot of my community with me. There are many people who listen to Archaix who have openly admitted that the only reason they're on YouTube is to follow Archaix.
The more complexity that we introduce into a phenomenon, it really reveals two things. One, we really don't know what we're talking about. Therefore, the complexity is merely a facade we're attaching to a phenomenon we cannot explain. And two, what we're trying to explain must be untrue. Yeah, you already know the Archaix tenet. If something is true, we can see it from multiple different vantage points. That means if something is true, someone who knows that truth is going to have the ability to reduce it to its lowest common denominators and be able to feed it to consumers as something that can be consumed. If in the If in a dissertation I leave you with more questions about the subject matter than answers, then I haven't done my job. I can leave you with more questions because the discovery of more information will always leave us exposed to a whole new higher plateau of learning. And with the answering of many questions provides a new awareness to new anomalies that also require questions. It's never ending. The reason is because if we were in a truly physical Newtonian world, then we would be living in a discoverable world. But that's not the world we're living in. We're living in a world that is amorphous. And as soon as the collective awareness agrees to a paradigm, something shifts and takes us to a higher level. That's not a physical reality. That's not a Newtonian universe. That's something more complex. I call it the simulacrum. And I'm starting to say it correctly now.
But what did they preserve? They very lovingly buried their dead in very sophisticated clothing, laid them all out, but they made sure to paint them in red ochre. Where did they get that idea from? Where did the Norse get the idea that the blood of an ancient giant that was slain in the sky had literally created our world? Where did they get that idea? So the red paint people, the red ochre people, the legends of the rains of cinnamon, all this, the blood, many times throughout history we've got blood rains. Where did all that come from? Where? Here's another reason why no one in establishment circles wants to even come close to the Phoenix phenomenon. This right here should really get you paying attention. It was only by the Phoenix research was I able to chronologically document this massive chronicon that I've done. And what I found shocked me. That the Jewish calendar used today is not only a fiction, but it's a psyop.
Roger Lear, who has made a career and become world famous for experiments on the implants that have been found in a bunch of females, and how he has broken up the membrane sacs and showed that they're biomechanical and that they even act with intelligence, and they even try to hide from his scalpel when he's trying to dig for them. Yeah, it's crazy, guys. It's technologically advanced, has nothing to do with aliens. It has everything to do with the species that's been here all along.
To the ancient Jewish mindset, they couldn't come up with they couldn't figure it out. Where'd all these giants come from? Because the Jews in the Talmud, they wrote in the Talmud, the book of Jasher, the book of Jubilees, over 40 different passages in the Old Testament are all about giants. Giants were a fact of historical life. What do you do when you find out that the Phoenix phenomenon creates a vapor canopy environment, and this new biosphere induces giantism in plants, animals, mammals, marsupials, amphibians, reptiles, marine creatures? Everything grows bigger and bigger and bigger. Flora and fauna grow to astonishing sizes. Now we can make sense of all those. We can make sense of all those 27-inch long human footprints that have been found all over New Zealand, Australia, Tasmania, across Africa, the Mediterranean, North America, Tennessee. Yeah, makes sense now.
The seals aren't even over till 2044. 2044 is the seventh seal. It's actually a break. Yeah, 6 seals of activity, and then the 7th seal is a quiet spell on Earth. It's a break, which is what's to be expected after something like the 6th seal takes off, the Phoenix phenomenon. It's going to take a break to get ready for the first trumpet judgment. But that's far in the future, guys. It's far in the future.
The prodigal son was the one the father was looking for. He's the only one that was rewarded. The one that went their own way, became a free thinker, did everything, experienced all kinds of things, tripped, got back up, and in shame came back home and faced the father, and then was rewarded when he came back home. everywhere. That when a community gets together, it can be as small as a family, but when 2 or 3 are gathered together, the informed field that is created from that merging is way more powerful than the over field that's trying to affect them. But when two people actually coalesce and begin to think on the same things, reality commiserates. Once they agree that something is going to come to pass, it's going to come to pass.
And in that text from the Nag Hammadi library, it specifically states that Phoenix was created to be a witness against the powers of darkness, against the angels that rebelled. What? Phoenix is the bringer of darkness, and yet it is a witness against the darkness. So Phoenix is said in this Gnostic text to have been created as a witness against the angels, but also to endure all the way to the end of the world.
This is what it says right here, and this is what the Phoenix does. I have a whole playlist showing you all the times Phoenix appears. Its signature characteristic is it bathes our world in red rain, red mud, and red dust. And it always depends on a local humidity as to what falls from the sky. The red dust veils appear around the moon. They fill up the sky. The whole sky becomes red with tendrils of veils of red. This is what the Phoenix does. This is what it did in 1902, as I've shown. Merodach, we have depictions of the winged disc without Merodach on it. But when you see Merodach riding on the back of the winged disc, as is very popularly shown by Zecharia Sitchin in a whole bunch of his books, that's Merodach using the Phoenix to restore order after this dragon of chaos has totally destroyed everything. This is what Genesis Adam and Eve reset was about. This is why so many ancient traditions link the Phoenix to the creation. This is what I've shown in many other presentations, but to see it in this ancient Assyrian text is amazing. Merodach, a wide space on the face of the deep, bound round. He made dust and poured it on the space. The Lord Merodach around the sea made an embankment. It's literally telling us that the world was flooded. The civilization before Adam and Eve was totally wiped out and flooded, and it took the appearance of the Phoenix to restore order.
Not taking sides and remaining neutral in as many affairs as I could remain neutral is how I became powerful in prison. And people deferred to my judgment. They deferred to my opinion. This neutrality possesses powers of its own. Not taking sides allows one to see more objectively, with a better clarity of those who are looking at a phenomenon, looking at an ideology, experiencing a religious faith from within it.
The one who stayed behind was blindly obedient and therefore of much lesser value. So this is my story. It's many of your stories.
But I know the prodigal son story is even deeper, because the soul that has endured pain is the soul that can heal others. And this has been shown throughout the history of the world. It is the souls that have gone to the darkest caves of the earth that have come forth with the brightest lights. The prodigal son is such a story. Only by experiencing all this negative base situations did the prodigal son return and understand. But the very experiences that we acquire in life, the things that have beat us up, the things that have put fear into our heart, the things that have sent us running, the things that have made us pack all our things up and move and just get away, trying to start over, all the things that we have experienced in life that have brought pain, real pain, into our experience are the very very ingredients within our own spiritual architecture that allow us to see the same pain in others.
But in the text that he received, it talks about the future. Our world is going to be like Sodom and Gomorrah. Now, 1,944 years after 96 AD, making this a huge isometric pattern, a palindrome, return of Typhon, the return of the Phoenix, which begins, it's the sixth seal of the apocalypse. Remember, the sixth seal of the apocalypse is 6 years before 2046. In the ancient world, Sodom and Gomorrah were destroyed 6 years after the Nemesis X object. Do you see how time is like a drop of water and the ripples are events that are going out? Because what I just described to you is the future, but I described it to you in reverse.
If the prodigal son is Jesus's ultimate model for our position in the construct and relationship with God, the co-creator relationship, if that's true, then the meaning of this entire parable is literally that our experiences and the way our life unfolds inside the construct is the very judgment you are to expect, and the religionists can go to hell because they're the only ones that will go there. It's a place that doesn't exist. It's dungeon programming to fill up those offering plates. That's all it's for. What loving God would ever create eternal torment? It's just a stupid concept. It's dumb.
They were the Sethites. It was the Cainites that were of the 7 king dynasty. The Cainites were the ones who were the metal workers. They were the rulers. They were the administrators, vast canal works. They built whole cities. This is the same thing the Sumerian king list tells us. The Sumerian king list tells us they built the manufacturing and metallurgy city of Bad Tabira. They built the shipping districts of Larak. They built, there's 5 cities, Shurapak, Sapar. Sapar was the library city. It was the city of knowledge. We know where it is. Sapar, after the flood, became Saqqara. Then Saqqara became Saqqara. It is the Giza complex in Egypt, the largest collection of books in the world. But books are containers of knowledge. I'm not talking about what you're looking at behind me. Now, we have Horus appearing suddenly after the flood, after the Egyptian pantheon is already established, astonishing the Egyptian gods. But they can't not let him in the pantheon. So he enters in as the last of the Egypt's gods, Horus, the son of Osiris. And he gained entry into the pantheon because he defeated Set. So, real fast, we're going to go through the Purge movies. Not the Purge movies, but what I did is I already did a video showing you the Purge movies, and I showed you the chart. Before we look at the chart to understand how incredible these mathematical associations are to April 8th, listen, we need to reduce everything to its lowest common denominators concerning the Purge franchise, because the Purge franchise movies are connected to April 8th. I've already showed this. I'm going to show it again. But they're connected to the eclipse. They're connected to the date of April 8th, 2024. The subject matter concerns purge. The name Purge has everything to do with what the designs of Apollo Pharmakia were. It's a purge.
So I want to call your attention to this word jinn right here. Right here, a jinn. This right here ties in. It shows that the ancient Semitic Arabian traditions mirror the Babylonian Syrian and essentially the Akkadian and Sumerian, in that the jinn were a fallen race on earth before present humanity. It is the same situation again. Therefore, this is more evidence that Adam and Eve were replacements. This is a part of replacement theory. They were replacements to a pre-existing human race that had fallen from its former estate. Anytime a prior race is destroyed and fallen, the next race on Earth automatically adopts traditions, and we don't know why, but they adopt traditions that the survivors of the previous race always go to Tartaros, Hades, in the underworld, or back into the deep. Yeah, guys, I got many videos on my channel explaining why. Yeah, Mount Cheyenne, anyone? Cheyenne Mountain, anyone? Domes, it's all being built. They've all been built. All right. In the Gnostic speculations of the Ophites, Demiurge, the creator of the material world, was filled with rage and envy at the superiority of man to himself. And his evil aspect was reflected in the abyss as in a mirror.
They showed up in the cities of the plague, and they were unaffected, and they wore these bird masks with goggles. Yeah, they were very scary. In the 1950s, the Men in Black existed. They were the subject matter of comic books. They were subject matter of urban legends. The Men in Black have always existed. Men in Black existed in ancient Egypt. The Men in Black have always been here. They're always associated with human abductions or the returning of human females back to their domiciles after they have been unknowingly abducted and fetal material was removed. This is the alien abduction phenomenon.
But when the disobedient returned back to the Father, is given a signet ring, given a new robe. We know what that means in the Christian mysteries. It means they were given an immortal avatar, something that the temporary avatar isn't even a comparison to. So Jesus's parable of the prodigal son, when we peel back all the layers and we reduce it to its lowest common denominators and we see the story for what it is a story of two groups being thrust into a world. One group blindly obeys the law and they receive no reward. The other group goes their own way, learns things by experience, and through those experiences, good and bad, comes back home. Didn't wander and go somewhere else, but humbled themselves and returned back home in shame, knowing they would be censured by the Father. McCarthyism is absolutely real. Why would the Purge movies be giving us that focus on Jewish people? It's very interesting. So the Purge period, anytime the Purge, every year there's a Purge for 12 hours. That period is called lockdown. Now, in the movie, The Purge election year, it's really interesting because this links the Purge franchise to the breaking of the seals, because the date, it's called the Purge election year, and it happens in the year 2040. 2040 is the sixth seal, breaking of the sixth seal.
But the stories that are told are that there was a female who was very, very well respected. So well respected that even 1,000 years later, the locals would not allow the priesthood to remove her from the canon. And yet, they cannot remove the fact that Ninhursag, Ninki, these females of the ancient pre-cataclysm world, they had the true power. And it was the females that had the power to go back and forth from the surface world to the underworld. But they relied on the female authority to give them access to somewhere else. A whole nother civilization that did not acknowledge the male authority. So the females were required to make the descent. And they went into the underworld to do whatever exchanges needed to be done with them. Over and over, these stories are telling the same thing.
They're done with laser precision, removing organs with no blood spatter. Most people don't know how sophisticated these are because they haven't looked into them. They haven't looked into them because this occult police force does a very good job at providing explanations that are just good enough. But if something now has a legal right to us and can enforce its proprietorship, they've been warned off. So Charles Fort is basically theorizing that if the world is being visited, it's being visited by opposing forces, and that these opposing forces are themselves governed by a more powerful body politic, that they just can't outright come in here and take stuff, and they can't outright go to war with each other. There's actual legalism involved. In the past, before proprietorship was established,
What do you do when you come across actual Roman records and authors who wrote in Italian and literally in Latin and literally admitted that the 552-year calendar, the Phoenix calendar, was known to the church? And they hid it and created a new calendar so you wouldn't know about this timeline. The new calendar is the calendar the entire world uses today. Jason didn't make this up. I've shown the data. The ADBC system was invented specifically to hide the Phoenix.
Scientific community got caught. 1953, another scientist came out, and well, first of all, in 1912, when Piltdown came out, they had a specialist on dental stuff look at Piltdown, man. It was supposed to be the missing link. Oh, evolution is true. 1912 made world news. Scientific establishment, they funded encyclopedias, books. Now, in 1913, 14, 15, all through World War I, World War II, what do you have? You have hundreds of millions of people educated that evolution is real. They came from a monkey, a chimpanzee, all because this little skeleton right here was said to be the missing link. This one little piece right here. But this dentist in 1913 analyzed it, and he published that somebody had filed all the teeth down from a monkey. Just a period. It wasn't a hominid. This isn't a missing link. Somebody had filed the teeth down. They shut him up. 1953, scientists were looking at Piltdown, man, and all the people who were a part of the hoax by 1953 were dead. They're gone. So other scientists come out and they start researching Piltdown, man. They find out pig bones, pig teeth. They're looking through this whole thing, and the entire skull is plaster. There wasn't a skull. There was nothing there but teeth. And the teeth have been filed down to deceive other scientists. This is the scientific establishment's proof of evolution. They don't have anything else. But they foisted that upon the people, and it worked for a long time by shutting people down, by shutting them up.
What do we do when we find out that the Phoenix phenomenon literally ended the ancient world? The ancient world totally ended in 522 AD. It started what we call the Dark Ages. Get that? The Phoenix always brings darkening of the sun. What happened in 522 AD? The Dark Ages began. What did the church historians and the Byzantine historians, Eastern Orthodox historians do? They recorded all the events of the Justinian darkness and the Great Plagues, a 25-year period of absolute chaos. Highly localized destructions all over the world, resets happening everywhere. And unfortunately, 138 years later, any cultures and civilizations that were emerging out of the ashes, a highly localized Phoenix destruction happened to that community. 130 years after that, the Maya were at their peak when suddenly something wiped out Veracruz State, Oaxaca, Central America, and even scholars were at a loss.
I already knew that the Mayan long count was 1,872,000 turnings of the stars. It was days. And any Mayan stargazer knows that. They know it because the Mayan long count is 13 epochs called Bactans. In every single Bactan is 400 years, uniformly as 360 days a year. This means that all 13 Bactans are 144,000 days each. 13 times 144,000 is 1,872,000. And when you begin in August, where the Mayan long count begins, when you begin in August of the year 3113 BC, and you count 1,872,000 days, you will come to the year 2046. You will not come to the year 2012. I published this book before 2012. I didn't get a lot of traction, and I didn't get a lot of traction after that. Why? Because I'm a convicted felon. Why? Because I was still in prison. I didn't get out till 2016. Very few people knew about my research. My publisher did because he used to work for Zecharia Sitchin. My publisher, Paul Tice, used to travel the world with Zecharia Sitchin. He was his personal videographer in those years. And I've showed you pictures of him on my channel with Zecharia Sitchin. So when I started conversing with Paul, I was a prisoner, but I was showing him data sets that he couldn't refute. And it angered him because Zecharia Sitchin was his friend. But at the same time, I recognized in Paul Tice someone who, if they were confronted with the truth, they would turn, they would embrace it, but it may take some time. So he and I started a friendship. It was a pen pal deal. He was a publisher in California. I'm a convicted felon in Texas, and I'm literally sending him manuscripts, and he's telling me, oh my God, you're blowing my mind. I have never seen this depth of material. These bibliographies are fantastic. And he sent me publishing contracts. We've been friends ever since. Yeah, he even had me scheduled to talk to what's his name? Jordan Maxwell. All that stuff was added later to give it veracity, to borrow from the antiquity and prestige of a phenomenon that was very well known among cosmopolitan societies. And that was the return of the phoenix. That was well known. And they tried to tap into that faith by throwing these symbols into the gospel narrative. Let's go and move on to the next one before I check my chat. The first phoenix appeared in the reign of Sesostris, the second under the reign of Amasis. These are pharaohs. The third in the time of the third Ptolemy.
It is about a total systemic reset. And we know, my Archaix veterans do, in the year 3895 BC, year one of the Anno Mundi calendar, the first year of the pre-flood world of Genesis, 1656 years to the Great Flood. 3895 BC was a Phoenix year. And in that year, Phoenix appeared as a fiery, revolving sword in the sky. This is how it was described. Now, Phoenix passed over the face of the deep. Biblical scholars have seen that this word neph is found in this phrase. But it's an Egyptian word. And it's the exact same word as fink. Neph and fink are the exact same words. But fink is Druidic, and it's the precise reverse of neph. Fink is phoenix to the Celts and the Druids. It's Phenc. I've shown this in many of my presentations on the phoenix. So we have this idea in ancient Egypt that a spirit that can create darkness and yet revive a world that has been ruined is Neph, this holy spirit. And we find this in the most ancient Egyptian traditions. The reverse being the Druidic fink should not surprise you. Archaix, the color blue protects a home from being purged. A major theme of the purge timing is election year. It's crazy, guys. Election year is a major theme of the purge timing. The purge helps insurance companies, corporations, and governments so they do not have to pay out so many claims, disability claims, retirement benefits, and 401ks. The purge is specifically designed to eliminate a lot of people so they don't have to pay the stuff out. The purge, designed to use lower class to keep the middle class at manageable numbers for and easier to control for the elite.
But it's precisely what is described in an ancient cuneiform Hittite text. The Hittite text describes an unknown god that wandered, its throne wandered from north to south, passing over the sun. It is precisely what is found in ancient cuneiform. They don't believe it because they think that all these stellar bodies, all these luminaries out there follow the design of what's called the plane of the ecliptic. But science has yet to acknowledge what the ancients already knew. We don't have one ecliptic, we have two. And this solves the mystery of all the ancient calendars and the anomalies in between these calendars, why these calendars are all different systems and yet they synthesize so perfectly.
So the Indians of the New World conceived that hurricane, this is where we got hurricane from. Hurricane, the mighty fertilizing wind, passed over the waters of chaos in the form of a huge bird, and so called the earth into being. This is from a book by D.G. Brinton called Myths of the New World. We know that book's going to be before 1897, but that's interesting because what do we find out about 3895 BC? It's on the Phoenix. It's on the 138-year Phoenix chronology. Can't make this stuff up, guys. Ancients thought that the ancients thought that a giant bird appeared and hovered over the waters, and this is what started the renovation of ancient Earth after a total systemic collapse of a pre-existing civilization. But you know what's not a restoration? The Great Pyramid in Giza. You know why it's not? We can't even lift the blocks. You can't even take the blocks off to rearrange them. Why? Because the adhesive is 1/50th of an inch thick, and it is stronger than the limestone blocks themselves. The Great Pyramid is a structure full of enigmas, but it's outlived every culture and civilization in this world. It's still there. And yet the interior measurements can still be found, and they line up with ancient calendars. How can this be? I'm going to show you. But how can it be that the structure's still here? Sodom and the cities of the plain are given back their possessions and people, and this begins 24 years of prosperity and isolationism. Guys, I got to tell you about this because it has everything to do with what the United States is going through right now. I need to tell you this. This is already in my Chronicon. It's already in my Chronicon, guys. But this begins 24 years of prosperity and isolationism. The Sodomites and their Canaanite neighbors grow famously rich, and their prosperity results in a degeneration into hedonism and public demonstrations of torture of foreigners and locals caught helping them. The Sodomites would take iron beds, and if anybody looked taller than the average person is supposed to look, they would put them on the bed. And if they couldn't fit on the bed from the bottom of their feet to the top of their head, they were strapped to the bed, and the bed had winches, and they would pull their body apart and kill them. It was a rack. So Sodom and Gomorrah were literally killing giants, killing anybody who was too tall and too big. So with unlimited resources from their proceeds from the mineral harvesting from the salt sea, they still refused to feed the poor, to house visitors, to clothe anybody. They didn't give strangers any lodging. It was illegal to give food and water to anybody trapped in the city gates. Every night when the sun went down, they closed the city gates. If any foreigners were found in the city, they were game. They could kill them, they could torture them, they could steal all their shit, and it was the law. the law of Sodom and Gomorrah was they were allowed to do anything to anybody who didn't live there that was caught in the city gate. It was absolutely the opposite of the hospitality laws that were on the books in throughout the rest of the Near East. This is what was going on. And this started after Sodom and Gomorrah were rescued. After they were rescued, in the 24 years after they were rescued, they had become degenerates and extremely wealthy and 100% isolationists. So let's see, the most destructive dates that I have ever shown data for all throughout Chronicon are only those that appear in 2 or more calendars. You just saw them. 5239 BC, Nemesis Cataclysm, which began those systems. 3895 BC, Adam and Eve reset, began the Phoenix system. 3439 BC, the Gihon flood, Nemesis X. 2239 BC, the Typhon flood caused by Phoenix. 522. This is the date, 522 AD, that the Dark Ages began. This is the date that screws up so much history, so much. It was out of the ashes of the Justinian darkness that all these kingdoms and all these empires rose up throughout Central Asia and all throughout. And we know some of them as the Tartars and some of them as the Huns and some of them as the Khans. You know, the Khans were in rule, but much of your Tartaria research fits in this period from about 660 AD all the way up to the 13th century. It's this great dark period, dark stain on history where everything was stagnant. There was no development anywhere in the world except Central Asia. And we have the architecture. We just don't have the history. We haven't been able to put all this together. It's not my forte. I'm just isolating that the Tartarian researchers are basically uncovering data about the post-Justinian darkness period after the world was totally destroyed. This isn't just Jason making this up. Many people have published this data about that. And when he submitted his material to the Royal Society in England to get more funding because he was broken out of money, he knew that they would grant it, because now the English laid claim to proving that the rumor Herodotus had heard 23 centuries earlier was true. And this put the English on the map instead of the French when it came to discoveries about the Great Pyramid. It was all political. So the English, probably knowing he's bullshitting, because Colonel Howard Weiss forged the cartouche and some Egyptian hieroglyphics that were very poorly done using the exact same red dye that the people along the Nile, the indigenous people, were still manufacturing. The same red dye has been used for thousands of years, and they did that. But he was snitched on. One of his men, Humphreys Brewer, wasn't cool with this. This obscure periodicity of 792 years produces 522 AD, the exact year of the Phoenix cycle. It is the only year in all world history where these two independent systems have a nexus point. It's the only, and I'm going to show you a chart where I actually show you the numbers of the dates going 10,000 years into the past and 5,000 years past 2178 to show you that not just these two calendars, but every calendar I'm mentioning, not one single out of hundreds of dates in the past, hundreds of dates in the future, not one single calendrical system ever has a nexus point with any other system. It only happens right now in what we call the historical record. We're in a closed system.
When the sun goes black, the moon turns red, rocks fall from the sky, worldwide earthquakes happen, and the sky rolls like a scroll. This has happened multiple times. In my research and in my published books, I show all these times that we have in the historical record that this happened. And because we have this historical template of 138-year periods, it was very easy for me to ascertain that the next one is May 2040, and that lines up with biblical chronology. This is the sixth seal of the apocalypse. When I made those discoveries 20 years ago, and they were published in 2006 and in 2009, I had no idea that out in the future I could use that information, and because of the unfolding of world events, I would be able to crack the code of what the book of Revelation was talking about in the first horseman and the second horseman, the first seal and the second seal of the apocalypse. They can be dated once you understand what the book of Revelation is. Once you divorce yourself from the idea that it has anything to do with the Jewish text. Once you completely separate yourself from the idea that the prophecies in the book of Revelations have anything to do with Christians. Once you remove that from the field, the Judeo-Christian programming is set aside, and you see the book of Revelation for what it is.
The Greek Cheops, although there's absolutely not a shred of historical evidence for that. And the historical record and the chronological records absolutely tell a different tale. So, guys, this is still my intro, but my presentation is going to go fast. It's mind-blowing what I'm going to show you. So, Colonel Howard Weiss, that's what he did. He did it. He's a fraud. Colonel Howard Weiss is a fraud. So after that, in 1859, John Taylor researches the Great Pyramid and finds out. He goes through all the arithmetic that everybody's published in the past, and he finds pi and phi proportions encoded within the pyramid. He finds evidence that the pyramid has something to do not only with space, but with time. And he finds the golden mean, the golden ratio. He finds it everywhere. And his theories, I mean, he even published a book. I have that book on PDF. Oh, as a matter of fact, because it's such an important book, John Taylor's book from 1859, I just ordered it this morning off of Amazon when I was putting this video together. So I'm going to add that to my library. But it's John Taylor's book on the Great Pyramid, 1859. I just ordered it. It is the book that was studied by the next great man, Smith, Astronomer Royal for Scotland, who in 1880 went to Egypt to verify to see if John Taylor was telling the truth about the Great Pyramid. But the greatest takeaway for me out of this whole presentation is the fact. It's the fact that this man in 1871 had a suspicion that the Great Flood, that the Great Pyramid of Egypt is actually some type of monument designed to warn future generations of this mechanism of flooding. And that's exactly what the ancient traditions say the Great Pyramid was built to do. It was built to survive a flood, but also it was built to be decoded by a technologically advanced civilization in the future that would figure out what they needed to do to survive the next event. We find at the foot of the Great Pyramid was a temple called the Mansion of the Phoenix. And the Mansion of the Phoenix was housed what? The Bin Stone, which was supposed to be a replica of the cornerstone that was supposed to be at the top of the Great Pyramid. And the Mansion of the Phoenix was connected to the pyramid. What do you do when you find alchemical texts that show resets, and they show the elite partying under the ground while people on the surface of the water butt-ass naked? What do you do when you look at all the alchemical texts from the 14, 15, 16, 17, 1800s, and you see all these illustrations being thrown in your face of all these technologies being used by people underground and all this reset stuff, and there's a phoenix hidden somewhere in every one of these pictures? Resulted in two things. One of them was an exodus of the Anuna. They left. Wherever they went, they left so they wouldn't be destroyed by the Great Flood. It was in the year 2070 of the Phoenix chronology. This is it right here. The Great Flood destroyed most of the people on the surface world. The Anuna departed. They made their exodus. That's the year 2070. Remember that number. How do we know the Surid was Enoch? Because it literally is a mirror for the book of Jasher. Enoch was a king. Enoch was a emperor over 130 kings and princes. But Surid, who built the Great Pyramids, was a king over 130 nomes of Egypt. It is the exact same story. Surid was an astronomer, an architect. He was a chronologist. What we have here is a scientist who, after excavating 40 caves, found humans and mammalian and avian life forms all mixed together so perfectly that he concluded these were not natural interments, that a flood had happened, and that because these were caves, they filled up with water, and flowing into those caves were all these bloated carcasses of humans and animals. So you'll understand just how compelling this scientist who disagreed with Ice Age theory, who for 37 years had been enduring the fame of Charles Lyell, who got funded and got to watch as all these other people in his field signed the contract. And in signing the contract, their books were promoted. Their research was promoted, and his book fell to the wayside until Jason of Archaix found it in an old PDF, or somebody sent it in an email, and I just left it alone for about 6 months. And then when I started reading it, I couldn't stop. You guys already know I'm all about giving credit where credit is due, and this man's name and research needs to come back to the forefront.
After studying this work, the Roman researcher and Nostradamus expert named Ottavio Cesare Matti published in his own book, Nostradamus, the Lost Manuscript, the following passage written by the prophet, which refers to the year 1903. Many will die before the phoenix dies, until 670 his dwelling shall endure. Now, 670 is a code. 670 is a code. Let me show you. I believe I can take 670 divided by the golden proportion. I can. Yeah. I can take 670 and divide it by 5. That is 1.618. And it gives me perfectly 414.0. That is a cursed earth period. 414. Hope you guys can see that. 414 is 138 times 3.
Accordingly, the Mosaic account of the 6 days creation would really have to do with the reconstruction of the marred and disorganized earth, which the Creator reduced to order after the banishment of the fallen angels. Please don't quote me that I'm teaching you guys about fallen angels. I'm not. We are looking through a lens of primitivism at what ancient people referred to was a lost, very advanced civilization. Of course, they would be fallen, and then they would be regarded as angels. That's a really good question. It also shows me that you're very new to my material. You're very new to my channel, because you live in two different realities at the exact same time. One of them is the collective, and yes, it's scripted. It's scripted with negative default programming. It is the substrate of negativity that tinges everything around you, and it empowers dungeon programming, these feedback loops that reality itself tries to corral you into. But that's the collective. You can phase out of that. When you phase out of that, the only thing you can phase into is the highly individualized personal experience. That's the true you. That's the world builder. That's the one that can defy everything the world can throw at you. You phase back and forth. There is no in between. So the whole of Norfolk was made a heap of rubbish composed of every known stratification of the world, mixed up with pachyderm mammals, serpents, crocodiles, and sharks of the torrid zone. The equator. What were sharks of the equator done deposited toward the North Pole? Because the tsunami came from the equator. in juxtaposition with the walrus, whale, and narwhal of the Arctic Ocean, lying side by side with the horse, wolf, pig, bear, bison, and deer, including the latter species, the large Irish elk. That's amazing. That's amazing. Can you imagine that? Whales, dolphins, sharks, all found side by side with mammal, I mean, creatures from the ocean of the equatorial area are found right there in the Arctic, buried with everything else. These tsunamis washed all life forms to the center, crushed them with pressure. Even sharks were probably crushed under all that weight. Man. The most striking peculiarity about this forest bed is the extreme contrast between its animal and vegetable remains.
And that is, you have to believe that you have done enough. Because any belief that you have not done enough is introduced into the field as a situation, creating the phenomenon of you having not done enough. Yeah, you didn't close a feedback loop. You kept it wide open. And new signals will always negate older signals. They'll cancel each other out.
4 years later, is we have a mentioning in the book of Genesis that it took 4 years before Noah had a successful vineyard. He's growing grapes. This is in tandem with the Greek legends of Deucalion. He's the new wine sailor. Deucalion. A proactive soul is one who builds their own world and the worlds of others. A reactive soul is subject to dungeon programming. In being subject to dungeon programming, you are a part of the collective. Being a part of the collective means that you are living a reactionary life on feedback loops that are programmed by others. You're either living your own life or you're living in the life of others. There is no middle ground at all. I don't even know what question set that off. Heavyweight dancer. That's a hell of a handle. Wow. How do we stay sane? Okay, I already read that. No. What spiritual significance of zero? Say meeting something at even versus combining and changing numerical values. All right. Tens of millions, thousands, maybe tens of millions of all these megafauna were facing the south when they died. Told you, man, it's extremely important. Remember, some of them were frozen solid. As if the animals had been retreating southward when caught, either by an inundation proceeding from the north polar regions or by a change of climate due to a wide elevation of land, whereby their former pasture grounds became converted into the frozen soil in which the mammoths had been preserved to this day. They were flash frozen, guys. They were flash frozen, preserved in place, and then entombed and buried there by the flooding. All northern Siberia, which is now glacial, was, during the age in which the mammoth lived, covered with a vegetation adequate to support vast hordes of these animals, even up to the 75th degree of north latitude. We're talking about a vast horde of mammalian life forms that don't just require a lot of vegetation, they require a tremendous amount of oxygen. This is what they needed. If they're all facing the south, if they were all facing the south when they were flash frozen, it's probably because they have visceral instincts. We know because archaeologist Christopher Nunn has told us in his own writings. He doesn't even know what it was, but a massive explosion happened inside the king's chamber, sufficient to take hundreds of thousands of tons of weight
and pressure and still blow it out an inch in every direction.
Do you see how this perspective works? Do you understand how much? It's the year 2024. Our world today is not even comparable. I mean, the world of 1890 isn't even comparable to what we experience today in technology. All these advancements, everything we've been through in the 1910s, after 1902, when everything exploded onto the world scene. 1910s, 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s. Think about how much the world changed in the 1980s, 1990s, exploded with the internet. Then the thousands. Now look at us. We're in 2024. Their world would have not been different than ours. Remember, it only takes us 200 years to go from horse and buggy to Hadron Collider. And the things that I'm reading to you now are done with a primitive veneer. You have to understand there was technology back then. It may not have been widespread. It probably wasn't ubiquitous at all, but it was there. And we have the evidence of every generation in ancient technology surviving somewhere and in some fashion. So this is what we have. 134 years after total systemic collapse does not mean all the knowledge was lost. All those surviving titans still understood all those things from the pre-flood world. They may not have been their expertise. They may not be able to manufacture and build all these things, didn't have all the tools, but the knowledge of potential, how that these things could be rebuilt and redesigned. 134 years is a long time to stay down.
The oldest of these observations, that of a lunar eclipse of the year 721 BC. Archaix veterans, you know that year, 721 BC, which took place a good hour after midnight. The moon was eclipsed by something. The second took place in 720 BC, about midnight. The third in the same year after the rising of the moon. In these observations also, our astronomers have found but little to correct. So, 3 lunar eclipses back to back. I'm not buying it. I'm not buying it. 721 BC is probably very different than what happened in 720 and twice in 720 BC. In 721 BC, we know the sun darkened. We know from Marcus Varro's research. We know from all the traditions and texts that I have cited that during the reign of the 7 kings of Rome, during the Roman monarchy, something terrible happened. And the sun went dark and the moon turned red and rocks fell from the sky. And there was all kinds of fallout. 721 was truly an apocalyptic time for the 10 tribes of Israel as well, because the Assyrians, the warlike Assyrians, marched them into captivity. And they were taken away from Israel. And Judah, the Edomites, were left behind. And they essentially became the people that we know them today, the Jews. So this 721 is a real interesting number.
Time's clicking. On March 30th this month, man, we're going to get together. We're going to have a blast. We're going to get together for about 9 hours, and we're going to have a blast. We already got the huge room already rented. And so you guys know how we do it. Every time we do the Houston meetup, it's all informal, and we just have a lot of fun.
We live in a sentient biogram, a construct that yields to us and reacts to us. But you got to phase into that aspect of your reality. You have to phase into the co-creator relationship, because there's only 2 phases here. You're either living a reactive life or a proactive life. How the media just forges and makes all these heroes. The only time I have ever voted in my life is when Texas gave me back my voting rights after 26 years in prison. You guys know the story. You guys all know why I went to prison. And if you don't, hell, my trolls will tell you. But you know what? I voted for Trump because I believed that he was the right candidate. I was proud to vote. I was very patriotic in 2020. And then the whole COVID thing just happened. And I started paying attention to the details. I started paying attention to everything. And yes, I had to grow, I had to mature out of that paradigm. And now I realized it was all polarizing. It's exactly what they wanted me to do. It's no different than the blues and the greens in the ancient Byzantine Empire. Two political parties represented by the blues, represented by the greens. There's no difference. You can read about those if you want to read, early church histories. You want to read the time period of the Justinian and Theodora period. You can learn all about the blues and greens, the political factions. Everything is an exact duplicate of what's going on today. I no longer participate. I could care less about politics. Every single person in the political arena has already signed the contract before they're even allowed to be in the political arena, to even be an option to be elected. Yeah, they've already signed the contract. So I'm not involved. I'm not just done with that. I'm not saying the world is not hundreds of millions of years old. What I'm saying is the distribution of geographical features that we see and we call topography around us is of late provenance. It's all very recent. It's demonstrably so. We're going to get into a book right here, 1871. This man was amazing because 37 years after Charles Lyell had released that data that basically told the world that, oh, look, man, we've got it all wrong. Everything, geology. Well, here's a new science of geology. All these rocks prove that everything's millions of years old. Listen, none of that was true. Every bit of that was artistic license for the second seal to unfold. And many of the things that were predicted right here on our Archaix channel on the first seal have already come to pass. Remember, earlier this year, I specifically told you guys that in the 40-day period after the eclipse, you need to expect some major disclosures about the whole COVID vax narrative. What has happened? Amazingly, in this 40 days after the eclipse, that's exactly what happened. Major networks, all kinds of huge news. I'm not talking about alt media. Alt media has always been telling the truth. I'm talking about mainstream media now is doing all kinds of disclosures. And I told you, the disclosure itself is a part of the event.
I made personal vows years ago when I was in prison, when I knew the value of the education I was receiving, when I realized that I had been put in prison to do this, and I had all this research, and I didn't know what to do with it at the time. I remember very distinctly in my late 30s, I remember talking to God in my cell and saying, hey, man, you know what? I don't know where all this is going. I used to cuss God out. I stubbed my toe, I cussed God. I said, man, why you put that brick there? Well, how did that get there? I don't understand. Out of all the architectural dynamics here, what is that doing there? And I, break my toes against it. So I've always had this relationship with God where I was just up front. And yeah, I would be very disrespectful sometimes because I feel like I had been given the shitty end of the stick. And I would tell God that. And all through my entire imprisonment, I used to talk to God. Sometimes when I was fighting people, I used to really alarm people because when I was punching and I was doing damage, I was actually speaking Psalms or I was quoting parables in the Bible. And I've always had this relationship with God, but it's not the type of relationship that you would really kin to as a Christian today. I still consider myself a Christian, but I do so in the original tense, not in this carnalized human sacrifice Christianity that had become later by many councils of the church. Because originally Christianity had nothing to do with a crucified individual. None of that.
There was a 5-planet alignment, and where it happened in which constellation told the Chinese that the Great Flood would happen in 207 years. I always found that very fascinating because 207 is a Phoenix number, but the Chinese just had it a little backwards. But the Chinese had a lot of things backwards. Remember, they called the 7 kings of the Anunnaki. They called them the Dragon Kings. And they even date them to the exact time that the Sumerians had. Remember, the 670 years before the flood was the reign of the 7 kings.
The prodigal son teaches us that the true immortal becomes immortal by default in making mistakes. That's what the prodigal son is about. The one who stayed behind was blindly obedient and therefore of much lesser value.
They didn't remove too much of it because 2.5 years ago, a really interesting photograph circulated through the internet when they were digging some of the sand out at the base of the Great Pyramid. They uncovered another level of blocks, stones, connected to the Great Pyramid, and right there was a fossilized sea creature right there on top of the stone that would have been facing the sun when the Great Pyramid was finished. Can't make this stuff up.
We are never alone. And the very fact that we are never alone brings strength to the living, but it brings despair to the lost. So it's impossible not to have a relationship with something that makes up the very fabric of our own being.
But we're going to show from Plato's own narrative, because I'm going to quote whole passages of Plato that is going to nail the coffin shut on Archaix theory. There's no way. The only way the Archaix structure could be promoted as Atlantis is by ignoring a bunch of facts in Plato's narrative. You got to ignore them. So let's get to it.
It's artificial. Yeah. Well, but it doesn't mean I abandoned God. It doesn't mean that I just wanted to be a sinner. It doesn't mean that I became a piece of shit. It doesn't mean that I went out and just decided to do whatever I wanted in life. I didn't become an atheist. I didn't become somebody who, Epicurean. I didn't do something just because I wanted to do it. I still searched for that missing element because I knew that I was a spirit. And knowing that I was a spirit meant that I had a creator. And that's what I hungered for. I wanted to understand my place in this reality. And in order to do that, I had to get in that quiet space. And I got tired of searching. I was done looking up, looking down, north, east, south, west, looking in the Stoic philosophy. I was done reading Aristotle. I was done with Plato. I was done with Arthur Schopenhauer and Descartes. I've read them all. I went through Friedrich Nietzsche's material quick, absorbed the hell out of it. Henry Cornelius Agrippa, I went through it all. Paul Carus, and then I just couldn't. Albert Camus, I read them. And I couldn't find what I was looking for. And finally I realized in all this erudition, in all this absorption of all these books, all this material, I realized it wasn't even there. There wasn't a single book in the world that can answer what I was hungering for, not even the Bible. So I started to look within. And the search within led me to an entirely different concept of reality, which made sense of this artificial world that I found myself in, and this real oversoul that was on the outside of this construct, but was still experiencing it through me.